Good afternoon. It is 5:30 p.m. The board workshop by video conference during disaster due to COVID-19 of the Board of Trustees of San Elizario I.S.D. held this December 2nd, 2020 is now called to order. Mr. Madrid, roll call, please.
The record show all board members are present with the exception of Becky Romero and Myrna Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Madrid. Okay. On March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice of this workshop has been posted online for at least 72 hours. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by a telephone call and internet access. We are meeting by use of both telephone conference call, online access, and through use of an email link for questions. If a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the administration will read the comments into record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide a comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or telephone call, please follow the instructions on the meeting's notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practical. An audio recording of this workshop is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have any questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. Okay, we will now proceed to the Pledge of Allegiance. May we please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now proceed to San Elizario I.S.D. mission statement. It is the mission of San Elizario Independent School District to graduate students with skills to meet the demands of a changing world by promoting student success as non-negotiable, channeling resources to match the learning needs of students, employ and retain quality staff so that San Elizario is a proud, innovative, and academically superior district. Okay, item 2 on our agenda is the school board workshop. 2A, board workshop to discuss TASB's staffing study findings, recommendations, and guidance for next steps. Presenter, Dr. Jeannie Mesa Chavez, Superintendent, and Cabinet members.
Good evening, Chair Licon, Board Trustees, and our colleagues, Cabinet team members who have logged on. We do have a presentation ready for you. I'm going to hand it over to Sir Beto Rivas. I believe they'll be getting the PowerPoint presentation together here. And let it be noted that we do have Ms. Hernandez. I see her logged in now.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Thank you.
All right, welcome. All right, Horacio, Sir Beto, you all tell me if you have the PowerPoint ready. Our intent is to go through the PowerPoint presentation. The information we received last from the staffing review from TASB and the presentation that you'll see before you right now. And then we can engage in dialogue where it is the administration's hope that you provide us with, recommendation and guidance for next steps so that we can successfully begin budget process, which is like around the corner. So Beto, let me know when you're ready.
Good evening, Board President Licon, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Mesa Chavez. I believe I shared my screen. If somebody can confirm whether you see it.
We
Yes.
see it.
Great. Okay, so as mentioned, this is an update to the TASB review, the staffing report that was presented at the November 18th board meeting. In this report, TASB presented staffing models with an approximate saving of about $1.9 million. And I do want to note that these are optional for the district to implement. None of them are required. So the outline of the presentation is we kind of start off with enrollment because that's what drives most of the money coming in. And then I'm going to jump over to personnel because that's what drives most of the money going out. And then there's a brief recap as to some of the changes that have been made in the last few years. And then I'm going to go into detail into this, the TASB staffing report, because one thing they did not include was funding. And that is a huge piece of staffing. There are certain recommendations that they made which come off as though we can save money, but in reality we wouldn't, because for example, if it is a position funded from Title I or from a state allotment, the money would have to be spent somewhere else. It would have to either go to supplies, it wouldn't be a direct savings, as compared to a position that would be funded through the general fund. And then finally, just an outlook. So in terms of enrollment, this is no surprise. We've had declining enrollment for several years now. The financial exigency calculation, this is being presented because it is in legal statute. It's been presented at different budget meetings as well. And it just kind of shows a calculation as to where we stand at this point in time. So in order to qualify for financial exigency, statute says that you have to have lost more than 10% of your enrollment over the last 5 years. In that period of time, we've actually lost about 17% of our student enrollment. As I mentioned before, student enrollment drives most of our general fund revenues. If you look, it's towards the middle of the PowerPoint. It's of the slide. It's that one with the blue line. The per capita. Per capita means pretty much per person per student. So here you'll see how approximately 76% of all the money generated in 199 is based on this. The next biggest chunk is at $4 million that you see under 5920, federal revenues distributed by TA. This is pretty much your food service fund, which is also heavily reliant on student count. So if there's less students, they're also going to be generating less in revenue. On the next slide, there's two ratios here, and they're part of this the report that's called the PEAMS Fall Financial Accountability Rating Indicators. And there's two ranges. So TA, based on our fall PEAMS snapshot submission, they'll take the size and then they compare it to the students, and then they compare it to the staff. And then you have a low and a high range, right? Low meaning where staff too low, or high being the opposite, too high. So if you look here on this table, the student to teacher ratio has kind of been in the middle. It's been at about 15, 11.5 being too low, 22 being too high. If we were at 22, 23, that means that every single class would be at that number. And that's how you would divide the size divided by the teachers. And that's how you get the average. In the case of student to staff, we were kind of on the low end for the first couple of years on this table. And then we've just begun to lose students at a much quicker pace, which is why we are now actually below the actual range. On this next slide, here you see the total staff from the previous slide broken down by categories. So this kind of helps to see the trend as to where, how staffing numbers have changed. And so if you look at the first one, teachers, between last year and this year, we went from 233 teachers down to 217 teachers. The biggest driver for that change was the activity-based, the attendance boundary change project, the ABC. By changing grade levels, we were able to not be spread as thin per se, and we were spread a little bit, we became a little bit more narrow in certain grade levels, and that created a surplus of teacher positions which did not have to be filled as they became vacant. So that's the biggest decrease there. You'll also see a big increase under educational aids. between the 18-19 year and the 19-20 year. There was an increase of about 16 aides there from 40 to 56. So what drove that is HB3, House Bill 3 took effect in the 1920 year, and there was a new allotment called the Early Education Allotment. And within that pot of money, the state was recommending, or one of the requirements was a 22 students for 2 staff members in pre-K. So that's because of that pot of money, every single pre-K teacher and pre-K teacher was afforded an instructional aid. So most of the aides you see, that's why you see the increase there, because they were targeted and they were targeted and funded with that pot of money. So this goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning, where even if an aid position goes unfilled, if it's funded through an allotment like the early education allotment, the money would still have to be spent somewhere else. On the next slide, this is very similar to the revenue, but now it's on the expenditure side. As you can see, 80% of all our money is tied to a person. So now I'm going to jump over to the recap to kind of review staffing changes since the 2017-2018 year, with one exception, which I'll get to, which is the RIF. I do want to just kind of mention that I will not be going in, since this is an open meeting, I'm not going to be saying names. I'm just going to, it's a very top level down discussion regarding positions. At a small district, sometimes you have one position, so it's easy to identify the person. I'm going to just try to avoid that as much as possible because it is an open meeting. So there's kind of 4 levels of things you can do with staffing, and that's kind of what this little table is. The smaller, the less drastic the change, the less financial impact, right? And then the opposite works as well. The more drastic the change, the more financial impact. So the 4 areas which we've been doing for the most part are, first one becomes attrition. It's kind of when a position becomes closed, it becomes vacant, it does not get filled. It happens a lot with teachers. As we have less kids, we go and we sometimes don't fill teacher positions. And then there is something a little bit more drastic, which is kind of a change. A person's job duties would be updated, and which usually means they end up picking up additional duties because we have less staff members. And then the bigger change would be restructuring, and this is kind of where the ABC project came on board. And then finally, the biggest one is a RIF, which the last time there was a RIF, as you'll see later on, I think was under Dr. Quattrini in 2010-11. So what are some of the examples of attrition that we've had? Here, I kind of tried to group everybody together, similar to the way TASB had it and to the way the PEAMS table earlier on in the presentation had it. So you'll see all these positions, as a person left, they went unfilled. Granted, I only listed positions starting from the 2017-2018 school year, but we've been doing this. I guess there's been more since before. I'll give one example. Here in my department, previously there was 2 departments. It was finance and there was a Department of Research and Development. So my predecessor was the assistant superintendent for finance, and then there was an executive director for research and development. So the executive director for research and development oversaw state comp ed and a lot of the title grants, the federal money. And then the assistant superintendent of finance pretty much oversaw the general fund. So at one point through attrition, the previous superintendent decided to merge both departments. And so that Department of Research and Development, it used to be the executive director for research and development, a program specialist, and a secretary. Those 3 essentially became one. They became a coordinator for federal and state programs. And then the secretary was a surplus, and we happened to have a vacancy in HR at that point, and that position was transferred over. So there's a few other examples that didn't make it onto this table just because of the time frame I was using. I try to focus on just the last few years. On the next slide, you'll see something a little bit more drastic. These would be changes. A lot of times changes are triggered by attrition, right? And so some of them you'll see later on like in the case of these instructional aides for the instructional support staff. So before we had 6 full-time guest teachers. There was one assigned at every school, and in theory, that position was supposed to be the first substitute teacher when a teacher called in. And then we also had 5 library aides. So each librarian had a library aide. These were all converted to instructional aides. Our computer lab teachers were also, our computer labs were staffed with computer lab teachers. These were essentially moved into the classroom and they were replaced by instructional aides. Under admin staff, here's a couple of positions that have been kind of changed, title change, or individuals have been reassigned. Auxiliary staff, you see the same thing. In support services, there's been some condensing. On the next slide, you'll see the biggest, the most drastic one that we've done as of late has been the attendance boundary changes project. 12 teachers were saved and 1 assistant principal position was saved. And granted, once the school started, we did not have any surplus teachers. All these 12 teachers had actually left, so we didn't start the year with any teachers not having a classroom. On the contrary, between then and the time the TASB report, because the TASB pulled the data and then they completed the report, between the TASB report and, between the snapshot for the TASB data and the TASB report, there were some changes, and you actually saw some of those in the budget amendment that was presented at the last board meeting. There was 2 less teachers at Loya, which meant 2 less classroom aides for those 2 teachers. And then between that presentation that TASB did and now, there's actually, I believe, 4 more teacher positions, teachers that are going to kind of retire, and we began looking and identifying whether they need to be filled. So granted, this is kind of fluid. As teachers and positions become vacant, we do try to not fill them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the most drastic thing would be a reduction in force. And the last time one was called here was in 2010, and it wasn't. A lot of times there's a misconception: reduction in force means you're gonna riff everybody. No, it doesn't have to be that way. In this case, the last time they did it, it was programmatic. They looked at specific programs. In the case of the high school health program, what happened there is the class was no longer a requirement for graduation, so they did not fill the position. On the next slide here, you'll see the staffing models presented by TASB. They list the positions, whether there were absorptions or additions, and then the cost for a total estimated figure of about $1.9 million. Like I mentioned earlier, though, not all of it is actually a true savings. So here, under the administrative professional staff, what I did, I took a snippet of what was on the table, on the previous table, which is this top part, and then I took a snippet of what the rep actually presented to the board from the PowerPoint, which is the bottom part, just to kind of show how the two go along with each other. And then on the next slide, I kind of try to dig into those details. So here on the left, you'll see our planning and instruction, our curriculum and instruction department, and then we're compared against our peers. So there's a lot of detail in this table. If you look at the total, it shows that we're staffing at 18 versus an average from our peers at 9, right? So 18 minus 9 gives us a surplus of 9 compared to the average of our peers. Now, if you look at the table on the right here, you'll see there's different columns: special fund and general fund. And that's kind of what the note is at the bottom is. If it's SF, if it's under that column, it's paid from a state allotment with mandated spending threshold, or it's paid from federal funds. So the money would not be saved if the position, I guess, became vacant and was not filled. The money would actually be spent somewhere else. Whereas the other column, the general fund, that would be a savings because your general fund pretty much can pay for anything. Now, going back to the difference between the 18 and the 9, if you look at the 2 rows, if you look at the where it says instructional coach campus level, that's the 3rd one down, you see we have 9 individuals that are funded through special funds and 0 through general funds, right? So in theory, we have 9 more staff members in planning and instruction than our peers, but they're coming out of federal funds. So it becomes a balancing act, which is kind of what the table you see, right, the little seesaw you see right below it. It is a potential savings, but you would have, I guess, less curriculum support. So TASB is recommending to absorb 2 positions. So yeah, we can absorb federally funded positions, but it's not really a savings. So absorption of 2 P&I positions that would really result in the savings would have to come from the 3 under general funds. And you know, there's 3 and you cut 2 of them, that department would be very, what's the word? Slim. They'd be very tight pressed. So another note is there's a little table here where it says other department positions not listed. So TASB did this throughout the report. They pretty much said, here's our benchmark table, and if your position doesn't fall in here, we're not going to include it. And that works for their report and their comparison, but for us, because we know we have 2 social workers housed here and 1 PEAMS coordinator housed in this department, full disclosure, we included a table here to list all the positions in the department. In the case of the social workers, same thing, they're specially funded. So not filling a social worker position, should it become vacant, just means that the money goes somewhere else. On the next slide, I tried to keep the same concept with every single recommendation. So here's the current library staffing model on the left, and then what they're proposing on the right. This actually would have been worse a few years ago because we had 1 librarian and 1 library aide at every single campus. So it's not as bad now. And they're pretty much wanting us to absorb 1 library position and redirect a library aide position from 1 campus to another. It's the same thing here. If you look at whether they're specially funded or generally funded, these are all generally funded. So you technically would have a savings here. On the next slide, here's kind of the same information for this group, the clerical staff. The table from the report plus the snippets from the presentation. So then on this slide here for campus clerical, you see on top the secondary and at the bottom the elementary. And then on the right-hand side, you see a table, special funds, general funds, all these positions, because they're clerical, they're funded through general funds. And then you do see, because they're recommending 2 additional people at the high school up top, a proposed change, but then you see a table here in black that says there's other positions that were not included. Those 2 positions that were not included were a counseling clerk and 2 part-time co-ops that actually replaced a front office full-time clerical staff at one point. On the next one, here is your non-campus support. This is all pretty much your hourly employees at the administrative buildings, whether it's Central, the Support Services Building, or Excel. Here, as you see, most of them are generally funded. There's only 5 of them, which are specially funded. And so here, once again, TASB is recommending to absorb up to 7.5 of these positions. And once again, there's 2 positions that were not included on this list. So once again, here, if they're on the general funded list, they would result in a savings. But what happens is your departments they get thinner, they get slimmer, and depending on the department itself, the workload obviously increases. On the next slide, they're recommending an absorption of 16 educational aides. And here you see Exhibit 16A up top, you see the current staffing, and then you see the recommended staffing. And then the table on the right kind of shows you how they're breaking up the 16. 3 of them are nurse aides, right? At one point, we had a nurse and a nurse aide at every single school. So this would have been worse a few years ago. We no longer have a nurse and a nurse aide at every single school. Now we only have 3 nurse aides district-wide. Here, I couldn't make it all fit on the same slide. So this is an extension of the previous slide. And that's kind of what this table is on the left, current, these numbers are coming from table 16A, and proposed these numbers are coming from 16B. Here I'm going to focus on this top part where it says aid, edu, and aid other. So they're listing 13 positions in one position, right? And then it's on the table on the far right-hand side, I'm showing how all these are funded. And essentially, they're all funded through special funds with the exception of 4. Those 4 are 4 computer lab aides, 3 at the elementaries and 1 at the middle school. These were positions that used to be actual teachers, and they were converted to aides, and the teacher was put into a classroom. So out of those 4, there would be a potential savings, but once again, teachers would have less support at campuses. And the way that would work is without having a full-time aide at the computer labs, essentially as teachers come in, period by period, every teacher would kind of have to start all over, see what was, turn on all the computers, make sure everything was plugged in. If the previous class, if a student left something off, or so the purpose of the aide is to kind of help facilitate that. And then in theory, the aide would make sure that all the software loads up correctly, that all the computers have been identified as working. If one breaks during a classroom, they would be calling the help desk instead of the teacher. And then there is a note at the bottom. This is what I had mentioned previously, that between the report and between this presentation, there were two additional teachers at Loya who are going to retire or have resigned, and because the class loads are small, those students have been moved into other classrooms still within the allotted ratio. So we, in theory, have excess aides which are being moved into other aide vacancies which are needed. On this next page, here it's the elementary school teachers. They're recommending absorption of up to 9 elementary teachers through attrition. This table, I guess this slide is very small. It was very difficult to get everything on one slide. So on the top you see current, and on the bottom you see what the proposed is. On the left side you see the 3 elementaries, and then on the right you see Loya, the primary. And then at the far right, you see the totals, right? So they're recommending 3 monolingual teachers, which is the top group, and 6 bilingual teachers, which is the bottom group. Once again, there's a note here, 1 pre-K bilingual teacher and 1 6th grade bilingual teacher became vacant at the end of December and will not be filled. So here, most teachers are funded through the general fund with the exception of Loya. The early education allotment provides funding for full day pre-K. So the second half of that teacher's salary is coded to special funds. So once you factor in not just the classroom teachers, but the other teachers providing full day pre-K support, that's how we come up with the number 6. So here, what's the downside? You can save money, but classes become larger, right? So here you'll see a little table where it says the average class size would increase to about 19.93 from the current class size of the average class size of 18.7. And then in the case of bilingual, the average would increase from 18.7 to about 20. Here for the middle school, they're recommending a total of 6 teachers. And here you see how they come up with that recommendation. So I took a couple of tables. This first table on the top on the left, it shows you your core subjects, and it compares us. So in the case of English, our average size is 17 students. The average size of our peers is 17.5. In the case of math, we're at 18, they're at 19.3. In the case of science and social studies, our class sizes are actually a little bit higher. So what TASB did here, they exhibit 20B at the bottom on the left. This is kind of the way they came up with the calculation. They take the class average and they kind of work backwards and in theory say every kid takes the same 7 classes. They don't really look at electives or core sections. It's just total number of students, total number of sections. And then that leads you to this Exhibit 20C on the right, which kind of shows you what the benchmark is. They're benchmarking that we should be between 22 and 24 students per class, which gets us, if you take the number 23, that's where the six absorption of 6 teachers is versus where we're at right now. But then once again, that creates this. Do we want larger class sizes or do we want to offer less electives? So in the case of science and social studies, we're already higher than the average of our peers. Should those numbers be higher, or should we have less electives? Should there less electives available for students to choose from? As far as the funding for teachers here, if you see about 20, almost 21 of them are funded through the general fund, with about 9.52 being funded out of special pops. And here you see the decimals, because if one teacher is teaching one class of one section of DAEP, then 1/8 of that teacher's salary is charged to DAEP. Same thing, if they're teaching one section of GT or the STAR Lab intervention code class, then those sections are charged to separate accounts. So one teacher in theory can be split across 5 different accounts if they're teaching 2 math, 1 DAEP, 1 GT, and 1 STAR Lab intervention class. And out of that, then whatever is allowed to be charged to the special allotment is charged to the special allotment. So that's kind of why you see the split here. In the case of the high school, the recommendation is 9. Same tables. On the top on the left, you see the core sections, how we compare against our peers. In some cases, we're lower or we're higher. And then TASB's table for backing into the number that we need. And then on the right, you see what that benchmark is. So they want us to be between 22 and 25. And that's kind of where the 9 came up. The same question applies to the high school. Should your core classes be larger, or should there be less electives? That kind of becomes the main focus for the middle school and the high school. And then in terms of the class size average, right now the class size average is 17.8, and that would increase to a benchmark of 22 to 25 if TASB's staffing model is implemented. And then on the right-hand side, you see the difference here. The high school offers a lot more classes that are eligible for special funding, which is why you see a bigger number of the teaching staff charged to special funds. So these include all your CT courses, your A+ recovery, TSI, AP, dual credit classes, DAP. All these are allowed to be charged to special funding because they're supplemental. And the next one, you see the one addition they're recommending, which is to add 2 custodians based on square footage. Here's a table for the custodians, and it shows where they're recommending the changes to be. And then on the far right-hand side, you see the staffing, same thing, special fund or general fund. This shows you all these individuals are funded through the general fund. So what's the downside? It would be more cost, right? But the upside would be we'd have more custodial coverage. But as noted on the table right below, with continued decline in enrollment and less classrooms in use, in theory, there should be less square footage to cover. There was, on this slide, you'll see the PowerPoint presentation that was presented by TASB had all the actual numbers and positions that I just covered, and then they had a bunch of other slides with other areas to note. And that's kind of what these are. They're saying to redirect 2 special ed aides and add a special ed aide, to look at athletic periods, to look at maintenance, CNS, transportation. They want us to look for efficiencies. In case of technology, find a ratio based on the number of devices. And with COVID and the current situation, we have a lot more devices now than we did before. In the case of security, the report does say that we're essentially overstaffed in security compared to our peers, but our initiative was to secure your perimeter. So the idea was to fence up every school and build a security guard shack at the entrance of every school. So once you have that, then you need the security guard there. So TASB doesn't consider that. They benchmark us against everybody else, and I guess nobody else has security guards the way we do. So finally, here's, I guess, the discussion piece that was mentioned earlier. On the left, you kind of see the overall summary of the positions, and then on the right, you kind of see, attrition, which is kind of what we've been doing. Enough attrition leads to changes in job duties. We've only had one big restructuring, which was the ABC project. And then the RIF was about 10 years ago under Dr. Quattrini. So here's kind of where, I guess, the bigger the change, the bigger the financial impact. Whereas the smaller the change doesn't mean has been no impact, because as I covered, we've had a lot of attrition and we've had a lot of changes, and somehow we have to make our budget work based on the number of kids. So as we have less students, we in theory need less staff members. It's just a matter of kind of reassigning duties while keeping everybody employed who still is here employed. Is there any questions at this point that the board may have for any of us?
Ms. Licon, this is Ms. Garcia.
Yes, ma'am. You have the floor.
First off, in my opinion, well, this is just me. We're not doing anything Quattrini did. And secondly, when were we, and I don't know if Dr. Mesa is gonna discuss this with us as well, but when were we thinking of, when would this be implemented?
Actually, there's not that's where we're having the workshop tonight, so that we get guidance on how do we go about preparing the budget. Basically, a lot of what's in the TASB report is not a surprise to those of us, in district whose job is to kind of take care of, watching the numbers, the enrollment and finances and all of that. Our question is, what does the board, how does the board want to guide us so that we can begin to develop a plan? So we don't have, none of this is going to be implemented in any way. It was the study was done. We just now need to have a discussion about where we're headed, what we're doing. And that then, if that allows the administration, okay, let's develop a plan based on what you all are indicating.
My concern was just the timing, because of the pandemic. I know that a lot of employees need their positions because of health insurance and such. And I guess that was important to ask for me, but that's all for now.
I have a question. This is Maria Hernandez. Go ahead, Fernie.
Okay, well, and going with Ms. Garcia's thoughts, I also concur with that. With the pandemic going on, I don't want no employees, whether it be support staff, professional, to lose their positions. Now, my other question is, through our current trend, through attrition, do you have any ball figure on any savings that we've done so far?
I don't have it off the top, but what I can do is the positions that were presented earlier in the presentation, I can get you those dollars figures as to what that would be. Because there's a slide on here where it has the second assistant principal at Alarcon, the communications officer, the facilitator for CT. I can get you those dollar figures and share it with the board at the next board meeting.
Yeah, I would like that. And one last thing, on the TSB staffing report, on all the bullet points, The word efficiencies. What exactly does that mean on the bullet points? Like for instance, consider analyzing the food services department for efficiencies. There's a lot of definition for that word.
Mr. Hawkins, would you want to jump in on this one?
I just want to know what exactly are we meaning by efficiencies throughout those bullet points.
I don't think I see Mr. Hawkins. I don't see him. Horacio, do you see him online?
I was talking about the child nutrition. I just use it as an example. But transportation, consider analyzing transportation department for efficiencies. So I'm basically stating what does that work? It was used in basically every bullet point. What exactly are we saying with that?
So, from my understanding, in the case of child nutrition, in the case of child nutrition services, a lot of other districts may serve more meals per staff member employed, and that's easier to do if the food is packaged. So if you serve more Hot Pockets, as an example, you just microwave them and pass them out versus a hamburger that's actually being cooked. So that's one of the. I know that's one of the points Mr. Hawkins has mentioned here is that he cooks a lot of his meals from scratch, most of them from scratch. It's less commodity. It's more actual warm meals versus like a Hot Pocket or something that's already packaged, that's already cooked. So you can be more efficient in terms of the meals served by serving more food like that. You just kind of lose down on the quality per se. In the case of the transportation, it would be in terms of, I think, the number of students riding on the bus. So you can have more students on a bus, but then that just elongates the route itself. So the students would be on the bus for maybe 45 minutes to an hour versus possibly 30 minutes. So you can become more efficient. And then that would be the downside to it.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Marina Hernandez. I have a question. Well, I have several. To touch a little bit more on what Mr. Madrid's question, when you say efficient, also I noticed that it's on every bullet point almost. We had spoken about the changes and assigning more duties to other workers through attrition. I'm just concerned that we're going to be overworking the employees just because we're not filling the position. And are they going to be compensated for the extra duties that they are acquiring?
So to answer the first part of the question regarding the efficiency, so this is what TASB is recommending. They're comparing us and they're saying, try to be more efficient here and there. In terms of the second part of it, regarding additional duties, we are going through the TASB salary study right now. So the beauty of having both is that the TASB salary study will say, these positions are underpaid. You need to, if you have the money, please provide them an equity adjustment, which we have done equity adjustments in the last few years with the budget. So what happens there is we pay the position at market, which is what TASB's recommendation is. So they essentially would get pay raises if they're under the market value and if the budget permits. So it kind of becomes a balancing act. If we can, I guess, be staffed at the right level, in theory, we would have funds available to pay people at the right level. So that's the optimal goal is pay people what they're worth, what you're making them work for. So that's the goal. And the beauty of the process is that we have the staffing one, the salary one is next, and that should be presented before the budget is presented. So the board by then would have seen both reports.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, on this slide that we're on, I see absorption of 16 educational aides. I know that these are just suggestions from TASB, but how do you expect to absorb 16 that's a lot of aides.
I agree. I don't see that. I don't see that doable. Once again,
Or
this is just
the 7 non-campus clerical positions. I mean, because it's a lot of numbers. I understand with teachers, a lot of them retire and leave for other reasons, but 16 and 7 is like, wow.
in the case of the aides, because most of them are funded through special funds. What happens is, like in the case of Loya, as the pre-K teachers retire and the class is kind of spread out with the remaining teachers, the aide would be placed in another aide position. And I mean, absorbing 16 educational aides, funding-wise, it's not going to save us money because I'd still have to spend the money anywhere. So that one's difficult to get to. The only 4 that are doable there that would save the district money would be the ones in the computer lab. But then again, the downfall is then you're giving more work to your teachers every single period. In the case of
Absolutely.
the non-campus clerical, yes, I mean, it's difficult. More department staff would have more work. That means, may not pick up the phone and call you back as often, may not email you back as often. I mean, it is more work. This is TASB's benchmark against the peer districts.
And with more work, we would become, or the employees would become less productive, like you said, not answering the phones. You're not being as efficient as you should. So it's kind of like you said, a balancing act.
Yes, it's a balancing act.
Thank you.
Norberto, this is Ms.
Yes,
Garcia. If we were not to make any changes, to stay as we were, what are the some of the costs that we would incur? I mean, what's the big what would be the, you know what I mean?
So,
Can I chime in real quick on that one? I just to add on a little bit to yours, Ms. Garcia,
Yes.
and maybe you can answer both of them, Norberto. See, because I'm seeing that we have an increase in expenditures and not enough revenue coming in, only because we are still losing students. I just asked for the recent number of how many students we're losing, and I believe we're down a couple, I think 200 more, give or take. And so we're not having enough revenue coming in, and definitely we don't want to lose personnel, and attrition has been working for now, but would there be a plan? Because I'm kind of worried that we're not bringing in enough, we have to increasing expenditures. And I'm just very, very concerned, where are we going to get the money to pay all this? And again, we don't want to lose personnel, but we still need to, we want to provide quality education for our little ones or for our students. What can be done? Is there a plan for that?
So to answer both questions, using this I guess this table here, attrition, changes, and restructuring, right? So the attrition has been working. There are positions that do turn over. A lot of times, sometimes the positions don't have to be filled. Sometimes there's savings because a person is retiring is replaced by somebody with no experience. That does lead to changes. In some cases, maybe the 7 on-campus clerical positions, maybe really we absorb one in 1 year, another one the following year, another one the following year as there is attrition, right? So the impact hopefully wouldn't be as drastic on the workload of employees. And then in terms of the bigger aspect of how quickly we're losing kids, and that may be more of an operational change. How else can we restructure here within the district to maybe make a bigger financial impact? And all this, I guess this is the interesting part. All this is leading into this slide, which is the financial outlook. COVID-19 is not over. There's a vaccine, but it's not over. We continue to have declining enrollment. And guess what? This is all happening as we're going into a legislative session where we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what the legislator is going to do in terms of funding. Here's kind of a history of what they've done. I've shared this before. They went 4 years. They kept funding the same. It went up for 2 years, and then it stayed the same for 4 years, and then right now it went up for 2 years, which is the biennium we're in. Until January 12th, until the session actually begins, by then the comptroller would have released his numbers in terms of funding. Once that number comes out, then we'll know how drastic the change has to be. If the comptroller comes out and slashes the state's budget by $10 billion, public ed will more than likely take a big hit, just like public ed took a big hit 10 years ago. If they come out and say, you know what, we're not going to slash public ed, we're just going to keep everybody the same, then maybe the drastic change isn't needed yet. In terms of what those drastic changes are, I mean, it's no surprise. It's what El Paso I.S.D is going through right now. It's what East Led is going through. What do they look at? They look at old schools. They look at small schools. They issue bonds. They build big combo fancy schools that try to recruit students from other school districts, right? This is kind of the way cities are across the country. You have the city, and then as people move, as kids grow, they move out. They move into the suburbs, who then have kids, and as they grow, they also move into the suburbs. So every 10 to 20 years, you see districts like this, just kind of nationwide, kind of having to readjust the belt because they have less kids. So I don't have an exact answer because I don't have an exact figure yet. So that's
right. And I think that's where that's where the conversation. That's where we need your guidance. What is it that we need to prepare and plan for? Because we are seeing the numbers, we do have our concerns, and there are things that keep us up at night. And when we see the balancing scale just kind of tipping more one way, and and you're right, we obviously, and we're on the same page, we don't want employees to lose their jobs, especially during a pandemic. But when we're losing students, the attrition part gets a little bit difficult. And then there's always that expectation of employees expecting a raise, board members, as kind as you are, wanting to provide that raise for employees. So we just need that guidance, of what will be our next steps. Where do you want us to go with this information? We know that we have the salary study coming up, but back to trying to answer the question, is there a plan? Well, this is the beginning of our plan. Is what is it you want us to go, in which direction? And we need to kind of have a little bit of that so that we know what kind of plan to develop around that.
Hello, guys. This is Mr. Chavez.
Yes, sir.
Well, my comment on this is just the following. I think that at this point, the information that we're being provided is not very clear in order to provide you guys guidance. I'm reading the report. I read the report, but without knowing, what our budget looks like, or what you guys are projecting our budget's going to look like, it'd be kind of hard to, I guess, make some decisions at this point. My question to you guys would be, like, for example, the instruction specialist. I see that we do have several of those positions, and I know that some of them are specially funded and some of them are not. And I mean, I understand what we have to do about being more efficient, but we don't run, for example, I don't know the day-to-day operations that go on in the district. So I would need more information or more of your guidance in order to help me make a decision. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, nobody wants anybody to lose their job, but if we don't have the money to pay them, nobody's going to work for free either. And I guess that's where we need you, Dr. Mr. Chavez, and Norberto to come in and fill in. I do think that we do need a plan, because I don't like doing, emergency stuff, or, be mirroring El Paso district where we're shutting down schools or anything like that. I mean, that was one of the points where I supported that plan, to be proactive. I'd rather be proactive than reactive. But I don't know. I mean, is there more information to share, or is this all we have right now?
In terms of the budget and the projection, this is all I have right now because the session has not begun. So I could make one assumption could be, there's not a cut in funding. So if there's not a cut in funding, then we take the existing budget we have right now, which is balanced. So then the plan at that point would become, I have to find expenditure cuts even to the number of students that we lose. Part of it can be cut in terms of supplies. And the biggest part, just like you saw in this budget amendment, because I also don't know how many kids come back in the fall. So on this last budget amendment, every October, November, I try to bring one where I cut revenues and I cut expenditures again. So at the moment, the only number I know is what's in statute, which is the current allotment, which essentially, like I said, would be our current budget, and then we can factor in less students, and then I can draft up a pro forma like that, but it would be very subject to change because the session has not begun. If they cut funding, then, like I said, the cuts would have to be more drastic. I don't see them increasing funding, to be honest. In good years, they don't increase funding that often. So in a bad year like this, I find that doubtful.
I understand. Well, I myself, what I would like is I would like you guys to recommend something to us. I mean, if there's any place where you think that we can be more efficient and explain a little bit further, because I mean, right now we're just looking at numbers, but numbers don't mean they don't mean much to me. If you tell me that we have for example, in this case, I think we have a total of 14, I think is that correct, in the instruction specialist?
Yes, between the instructional coach and the instructional coordinators, there's 14 of them.
So I mean, that doesn't mean, to me, if I just look at numbers, it would make sense to cut down to what TASB says. But I don't know what they do or what it entails or what's needed, what's not needed. So I would request that you guys give us a little bit better information. And I mean, there has to be some suggestions. I mean, that's what we're up here to make some tough decisions, but I would like more information, at least at that level, as to why we have those positions or which ones are needed. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's gonna have to advocate for their department, and but I would like to get more information. That's the bottom line for me.
Okay.
Norberto, this is with Garcia
Yes.
again. For the high school, there was a suggestion to have less teachers or less electives. Did we do a study on the electives that the students were not joining, where we had lower classroom numbers?
I would have to defer that to, I guess, the instructional side.
I'll take the question, Mr. Rivas. Good evening, Board President Licon, board members, Dr. Mr. Chavez. We do study that throughout the year, actually. When we start to see that our numbers are decreasing in certain programs, we begin to recruit because we don't want to lose our programs. One example, just this past school year, was our ROTC. And so we were below, and there's some requirements beyond TEA in terms of ROTC. And so we were really making sure that we had the numbers, at least the minimum required numbers in those sections. And we go through that for every particular section. For the other example I could give you is in CTE. I know that Ms. Sanchez, Sandra Sanchez, our CTE coordinator, has been looking at how can we be efficient with our pathways so that we have students in the right pathways, in the right electives, to end up with certifications at the end of their high school experience, as opposed to having just piecemeal electives. So that's another way to be efficient with our electives and our sections. So we definitely look at our electives, and when we do need to recruit, we do recruit. And again, it's almost in a yearly basis. We're having conversations almost every 9 weeks about the electives.
Norberto, we have a maintenance building, right? A warehouse. Do you know the cost that incurs yearly? If we can have that as well, because and this is just as a suggestion, I don't know, but couldn't we receive packages at every campus opposed to having a whole warehouse?
Yes, and it would work in some cases, depending on the item, right? So picture a box of office supplies that comes from Office Depot. That's totally doable. Then picture a pallet of computers being dropped off there in the front. I mean, at that point, IT has to image them, so we still have to go pick them up, take them to IT, get them imaged, and then get them delivered again. So in some cases, and I think Tasby did talk about that, it's a drop ship method. In some cases, it works. In some cases, it may not. And then the other aspect too is the receiving of it, because then I pretty much giving the campus clerical staff more work because they have to count and make sure they got everything, that they received everything they ordered on their PO, because then they have to remit that to us for payment, for processing. So it would be a bigger burden on them.
From my understanding, they do that anyway, because when warehouse sends something to a campus, they still have to double check the PO.
The warehouse checks the PO and enters everything in the system. And then when the warehouse goes to the campus, they say, I'm delivering 10 boxes to you. And then the campus signs off that they received 10 boxes. But the actual entering the data in the system, the campus doesn't do any of that. The warehouse does. All the campus does is they sign off on the report that the warehouse worker shows up with.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
I mean, it was just a suggestion, because that's a major savings right there.
Yes, it works. It works with certain products. I would agree. With other ones, I think it kind of becomes a little bit more complicated. And then the final aspect of that, though, is the shipping itself, because Sanelli's always had centralized warehousing. FedEx, UPS, at that point, then.
But that's their customer service. That's a solution that they can. We're paying them to do that. I'm just saying, maybe we can find it there and see if compare numbers and see how much we could save there.
Sure, I can, and I don't know if Mr. Martinez is on the line. I don't know if he wants to weigh in on the warehouse, because he oversees the warehouse operations.
Good evening, Board President, Ms. Licon, members of the board, and Dr. Mesa Chavez. Yes, just to add to that, what Beto was explaining is correct, and I see what Ms. Garcia is seeing also, where some of the items, smaller items, arrive, they get received here and then get delivered to the campuses. So, like Beto said, some of those smaller items could be doable, but then we have also bulk items that arrive, like for custodial products, for the cafeteria, that are much bigger in scope, and actually you would need more storage space also. So that would be a consideration for the campuses. So you would basically be constructing like a mini warehouse at the campuses, versus right now we have one centralized location where it's kind of like a one-stop shop and convenient, faster, where we maintain the minimum levels and maximum levels so that we don't overstock and have too much inventory as well and hold that money there. That's one of the possibilities that could happen if we do that. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out as far as the warehouse is there's more to the scope of the warehouse versus just the receiving, the processing of the system, and then taking it to the campuses. They're also involved in instructional materials ordering, receiving, of course, just like Beto said. Those large orders come in, they get received in the system, they get verified physically, and then they get barcoded. They're involved in instructional materials yearly inventories. They're auditing that. They do the district fixed assets inventory audits. They also are involved in the district record keeping and destruction as per guidelines. What else? They also process the discards, the non-technology discards for the district, and they're in charge of picking those up from the campuses and then making sure that they get disposed accordingly. They also handle all the mail processing. They pick up from the post office, they deliver to whoever they need to deliver, and then they process all the mail for all the campuses that is going out as well. And there's other things that also fall into the scope of the warehouse. I just wanted to point that out as well, because those would be other duties that we would need to consider with that.
So I'm going to jump in and take the heat a little bit off of Mr. Martinez so he can breathe. And so that's just an example. And so I think that's kind of what you'll see district-wide is obviously cabinet members are going to jump in and really give the value that it's very much due to, all of our employees work hard. But that's kind of like the discussion that's going to be happening is that, if like what you're indicating, Mr. Chavez, for us to proceed and come up with a plan, that's where we want to make sure that we're going to be looking at everything so that we can come up with the best possible plan. But we also don't want people, especially out in the community, for just individuals to not be offended. We have to look at everything. And no, just like right now, nothing is final until discussions are had, but we do have to continue to be balancing things because if we, continue to have loss of enrollment and we don't start kind of tightening certain areas, then we're going to be in a little bit of a problem there. And so, I've been writing down some notes as I've heard everyone speak. I want to ask a question to Mr. Madrid. Mr. Madrid, there was a time, I think there was a conversation in prior where you mentioned there was a time when there was not any football. Can you explain that to me? What is it? Why is it that the board made that decision?
What I remember is that, of course, the budget was tight, and so they had to make cuts here and there. And that was one of the ways that the participation wasn't really there, even though that's the main, well, not the main sport, but what starts the high school year. So they removed it for that 1 year, 2 years to try to come up with some kind of savings. You wouldn't have a coach, you wouldn't have the assistant coach, or vice versa, junior high and all that. So it was a savings for the district. It was a 2-year plan, but it only lasted 1 year because the community wanted football back. But that's more or less the background on it, just for a cost savings because the crunch was there as far as what was coming in as far as monies. Enrollment wasn't there. And going on that note as well, right now with the pandemic going on, we don't have all the cost in the district that we usually occur when we have a normal running district. So aren't we having some kind of savings as far as that? Because I know that, the buses, there's different things that we're doing on a daily basis that right now we're not having to do them. So aren't we saving money there? And as far as this SEISD study, I wouldn't do any of the changes as far as adding to the payroll, because we're trying to talk about crunch, attrition, and we're getting recommendations to add here, add there, add here. But right now, I would just not even look into that. Need them? Probably do, but at the same time, we're talking about attrition and cutting the budget and this and that. So I wouldn't even consider adding any of these recommendations. But that was more or less on the football, because the participation wasn't there, and it was costing more than what it was benefiting the district.
Okay, that was a wonder for me that I had in the last 72 hours. I was trying to remember as I was preparing for this meeting. Sir Beto, can you mention to the board our conversation of where we've, back to what Mr. Madrid is mentioning in terms of the cost savings that we are having, for instance, on the reduction of overtime. There's been some discussion that we've had about that. Do you want to mention that?
Sure. There is a savings that is incurred when the district isn't fully operational. Last year, the ESSER grant, if y'all remember, it replaced our general funds, right? So the state cut revenue and they pretty much used the federal money to fund us. So they cut our revenue by about $1.6 million. And so there was a huge amount of savings that were incurred because fund balance overall did decrease at the end of last year in the operations, but most of it was in food service. I think in 199, number was around $250,000. So the $1.6 million that we lost in revenue because of the way the state changed their funding mechanism should have meant that we lost $1.6 million in fund balance, but we only lost about a little under $250,000 in fund balance. So the difference between the two is actually the savings. And that savings comes from things like fuel. Buses aren't running. So even though the PO is open and the money is encumbered, we don't actually spend the entire thing. So that money comes back. In the case of overtime and extra time, because bus drivers are not on athletic activity runs where they're driving kids out to Dallas to compete and picking up overtime, or working games on the weekends and picking up overtime, we're not incurring overtime either. So the savings will trickle in, and they'll be, I guess, fully finalized at the end of the year. The hope is that attendance-wise, that we don't lose as many more kids, or that our attendance is not much lower than the historical average, because then at that point, if we're still losing more money, then the savings that we technically could have had pretty much only offset that. And then regarding the decrease in fund balance last year, a big part of it had to do also with the grant program. I believe it was on the last board meeting where we got reimbursed 75% of it back through the Texas Department of Emergency Management. The only problem there became that because the cost was fully accounted for as of June 30th, it showed as a loss in 1 year, but we got 75% of it back this year. So the loss was actually a lot less than the $250,000. So the savings, I do anticipate there to be savings. One thing that will happen is, in the case of travel, right, like athletic student travel, because a lot of the games and the leagues got canceled, that money stays there. We're not going to move it to supplies or spend it on supplies. That travel money that concept would apply to all departments. If you had travel money that was going to be for PD, you can move it to a webinar. You can't move it to supplies unless we need to spend it because it's a state mandated allotment. So there will be, I guess, a freeze in terms of spending in things like that. Officials is another big example. We have less games, so we're going to have less money being spent on officials. That money is not going to get moved somewhere else or be spent somewhere else. It theoretically should come back to savings because it is a tight crunch.
Norberto, so the timeline for legislative, when did you say it was? January?
It starts January 21st.
It starts, and then when do we need for the budget?
So the budget adoption has to be done before June 30th. And typically there's a budget workshop in May, late May, mid to late May, or early June, and then the budget adoption separately. I've seen it both ways where we've been in all my time here where we've had a budget workshop separate from the regular meeting and then the budget adoption separate from the regular meeting, but that just means 3 meetings. I've seen it where maybe the adoption is at the regular one or the workshop is at the regular one. That just kind of depends on how the meetings are scheduled. Officially, the session doesn't end until Memorial Day. The governor has the ability May 31st, which is the Memorial Day weekend, the governor has the ability to veto anything up to then. If the governor does not veto it, but both chambers pass it, it becomes official, it becomes law. So the final, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So we still have some time because, I mean,
Yes, ma'am.
from January to June, it's 5 months. And then, so technically speaking, we can't really do anything because we don't know the budget yet. I mean, we could get more, we can get less. And then, you know, my thing is causing unnecessary stress right now. And then, you know, it's during a pandemic when we don't even know what's going to happen in January. Like, I appreciate, you know, but it's just, they're trying times. And then, you know, I just feel like, I mean, we can get the things that Mr. Chavez was, but yeah, he's right. You know, we don't even know if we're going to be funded or not, you know, or how much we're going to get or not.
If I
Beto,
may chime in on this,
I'm sorry, can I say something?
oh, well, what I was
Sorry.
trying to say is that these are crucial conversations that we need to have because we are seeing this. We are seeing, you know, with this pandemic where we've had to make expenses that the district had to incur during this time. And honestly, I do think that these are important conversations that we start having now and not wait until then. I mean, slowly, like they say, start having a plan now, not wait till the end. So I'm, you know, I am grateful that we are getting this information. Granted that, you know, perhaps, you know, it may seem like it's too soon, but it's better to be prepared than not to be prepared and have something in place. Let's start talking about it now. Let's start looking into it. Let's start preparing and get this information, you know, so when we do need it, we've gathered enough and we can make a sound decision when the time comes. And that's just my perspective.
May I say something?
Ms. Hernandez, yes, ma'am, you have the floor.
Sorry. I was just gonna say I agree with Mr. Chavez and with Ms. Licon. But just like you mentioned, Beto, that we won't know until January. We really can't make a decision. But like Ms. Licon says, you know, we need to be proactive and start having conversations now. But back to Mr. Chavez's request, is there any way that you can provide us with a plan for best case scenario and worst case scenario? You know, looking at which way they're going to go, since we don't know.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry.
No, I was me, Mr. Chavez. I just wanted to say something, Beto, before you answered. And what I'm looking for is when we had the last budget hearing, when we agreed to this ABC, is that was kind of us preparing for something like this. That's how I understood it, right? And looking at the stuff that we approved for the District of Innovation, I think you guys have some wiggle room to make some adjustments there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's the only thing else, because that's the reason why. I mean, I know this study was made, and you know, it was necessary because it gives us insight as to, you know, to compare ourselves to other districts, and then hopefully, like you said, that other one with the salaries comes in. And I do believe that we do need to talk about it, but at the same time, I think we empowered you guys, the executive staff, to have already a little bit of leadway based on the decisions that we made in the past. And I guess that's kind of what I'm looking for, a little bit more in-depth breakdown, like Mr. Hernandez said, as to what would be our best case scenario, what would be our worst case scenario. And I like that breakdown, like when we did the ABC, when you went, you know what, we're going to go from having 23 kids on third grade monolingual to, you know, 22, I don't know, whatever the number it is, you know what I mean? But that's more in depth and more of a breakdown that will actually make us see where the impact's going to happen. And that's what I would like. I don't know if you're able to do that, something like that soon, or when would you be able to do it? And I know there's a lot of variables, but I personally, that's something that I would want to see before I make a decision. I just want to make an informed decision.
Okay, to answer both questions, Mr. Chavez and Mr. Hernandez, yes, I can draft, I guess, a more detailed one. I guess this was more of a springboard, right? An appetizer. TASB came in, said, you can save $2 million. Guess what? You really can't save $2 million overnight, but you can save some of it. So then, how much of it can we save? Because all this is optional, then what I can do is use this table as a springboard and say, okay, if funding doesn't change, we can kind of maybe look at attrition and changes based on these recommendations. And as they come in, they go through, we can bring in the more detail on the class counts. Because like the wiggle room for the DOI allows us to go up to 24. And then looking at, let me see if I can find the page real quick. And looking at the TASB salary, at this staffing report, they're only using 22. So we do have a little bit more wiggle room in there. And then in the case of a worst case scenario, once the appropriations bill is available, I believe the Senate is running the budget process this year. They take turns every biennium. 1 year it's the House and the following year it's the Senate. The House is typically a little bit more friendlier, which is why we got HB3. But once their bills come out, then both chambers put out their bill, and then they actually include what the basic allotment will be in their bills, right? So at that point, then I can begin projecting and show you, okay, this is assuming nothing changes, assuming both chambers kind of don't agree, or, here's what the House version looks like, here's what the Senate's version will look like, here's how many kids we can reasonably expect to lose, and then we kind of tie that back in with, here's attrition, changes, and, restructuring. If there is any other big operational change we can present to the board, then we can kind of try to show you everything more detail, kind of using this report as a springboard and using the TASB pay report as a springboard as well. So I can definitely have something like that. Because of when the timeline is, realistically would be, I should have something before spring break, just a good draft before spring break, maybe mid to late February, a good draft before spring break, and then we just got to keep up with whatever changes may go into those bills, because it goes up to one chamber and back down to the other. It goes to committee groups, and then they kind of agree or disagree. And then at least at that point, though, before spring break, the board would have an idea as to what's out there, what are the options, so that come May and come June, it's not a surprise.
Yeah, I would agree to that. And like I said, I understand what you're saying, and I don't think you need to do everything at once. I mean, I guess the first thing that I would request is that you compile a report or presentation to us based on what we know right now, and based on this report that we've received, and then all the other that's unknown, we'll get there when we get there, but at least, start discussing, what are the possibilities with what we know so far, what is fact right now. And then the other stuff, I mean, I do understand. It's simpler when we cut it. Well, for me, it's a little bit simpler to process and understand the information if you cut it down, instead of just throwing everything at me. Sometimes I kind of get lost there, and I don't like being frustrated, and I'm not, but I would rather you do something like, okay, this is what the TASB is recommending, this is what we realistically can do. And I know it's not like something that we're going to vote to act on, but at least we have it on the back of our mind, and we can have something to compare once you have the information that you need in order to do a presentation for the next year budget.
Okay, I can work on something like that.
Any other questions or comments from trustees? Because I would also like to give the opportunity to any of the folks on cabinet if they have any clarification questions, because obviously, we will work on this together as a team. So if there's any points of clarification that you need to ask, let's begin with our trustees. Are there any other questions or recommendations from our trustees?
Well, I just have two comments that I want to make. And one, I don't know how true this is, okay, but if you all saw the elections and when the new elected president got, I guess he did his victory speech, he mentioned something. He said, teachers, you have one on your side because the newly elected, the wife, spouse, I guess, she had educational background, so that might help the cause. I mean, for what it's worth, it is what it is, right? But an advocate for education there. Secondly, as far as something I forgot to tell you about the football program, is also another reason that they canceled it is because our district consisted of Marfa, Presidio, Del City, Monahans, Van Horn, so it was a lot of traveling where we were winning one game a season, so it wasn't feasible to be doing all that traveling. And that's another reason that they also canceled the football program. But hopefully with the new presidential, like I said, educational background, maybe it's a plus for the educational field, hopefully.
I'll let Dr. Segovia mention his cause. We were talking about precisely some of the priorities of the president-elect, but any other trustee that may have any other points of clarification or questions or recommendations for us? We'll come back to you. I'm gonna, Dr. Segovia, you want to mention to the team what we were talking about?
We were talking about the importance of education, and I'm hopeful that this new administration coming in takes education as a priority, because we're definitely in a crisis situation here across our nation, not just here at San Elizario, across our nation. And so the hope is that they are serious about looking at education and helping us out, not just financially, but also understand the accountability piece and the learning process that goes through that. And so hopefully we'll get an audience with the president-elect here soon, and maybe invite him for some coffee here at San Elizario.
All right. So any other team members on cabinet that you have questions or points of clarification? Because I think we understand a little bit more, and we will get a plan, portions of a plan developed as we go. Anybody else on cabinet with questions or comments or points of clarification? I'm trying to provide the 9-second wait time, Dr. Segovia, but Sir Beto, any other questions or points of clarification that you think we may need? I took my notes on this end, and I'm sure Christine is going to be doing her minutes, but I think we have a path to go forward with.
Yes, I think the goal is, which we've been fortunate the last few years we've done it. The goal is we try to keep everybody employed while still trying to find efficiencies by creating synergies and, trying to do new things to kind of operate a little bit leaner and just adapt with the times that we have less kids. So we need a smaller district. That kind of the mentality, that should be the mindset, strive to do more with less, while keeping everybody who wants to work here still working here with an adequate paycheck.
So if there's not any further questions or recommendations from the trustees, Mrs. Licon, I hand it back to you. And I think if there's an adjournment, then I think we close it off. But I hand it back over to you.
Thank you. That was a lot to take in. Thank you. A lot for you all to take in as well. And with that said, very productive meeting. May I please have a motion to adjourn at 6:59?
I so move.
Oh, sorry, Fernie, go ahead.
Motion by Mr. Madrid. May I have a second?
I second. This is Marna Hernandez.
Okay, Ms. Hernandez. So we have a motion by Mr. Madrid to adjourn, second by Ms. Hernandez. Mr. Madrid, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Chavez,
Aye.
Mrs. Garcia,
Aye.
Mrs. Hernandez,
Aye.
aye. Mrs. Licon, aye. We've adjourned. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.